This is the RX 588 gig, a graphics card that might go down in history as one of the best value propositions in PC gaming for many, many years. But it's 2026 now. Is this card still a good buy, or is it finally time to take it behind the barn and send it to GPU heaven?
I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
Now, I'm sure a lot of you already know about this graphics card, but for the rest of you, let me do a quick little dive into the RX 580's history. The story starts in April 2017. AMD launches the RX 580 at an MSRP of $229 US. On paper, it was just a refresh of the RX 480. Same Polaris architecture, just clocked slightly higher on a more refined 14nm process. It ran hotter, it pulled more power, and it felt like AMD was just treading water while NVIDIA's Pascal architecture was running away with the efficiency lead. But then, people actually started gaming on it. At 1080p, this card was very, very competent. It didn't just compete with the GTX 1066 gig. In DX12 and Vulkan titles, which were the future back then, the 580 started pulling ahead. But the RX 580 hit the market right when the first major Ethereum boom was starting to bubble. Within just weeks of launch, you couldn't find these for $229 anywhere. They were getting snatched off shelves by the truckload at $400 or even $500. Then came the 2018 crash. Crypto tanked, and the market was suddenly flooded with thousands of divorced mining cards. This was the first time we saw the RX 580 become the budget king. You could pick up an 8 gig model on eBay for $100 all day long. And just when the card was starting to show its age, 2020 happened. COVID plus the second crypto explosion sent GPU prices to the moon again. The RX 580 became a zombie. It was 5 years old, but selling for $400 again because it was a workhorse for Ethereum. That finally ended in 2022 with the merge, when Ethereum switched to proof of stake. GPU mining died overnight, and the 580 was finally, officially, sent out to pasture. But if you've been following the tech news the past few years, you might have heard that AMD stopped supporting the RX 580. And that's mostly true, but it's a bit more nuanced than that. Back in late 2023, AMD officially moved the Polaris and Vega architectures into a legacy support branch. What does it actually mean for you in 2026? It simply means you're still getting drivers. The latest release just dropped in January, actually. But these aren't performance drivers, they're just for maintenance. AMD is no longer spending thousands of engineering hours trying to squeeze 5% more performance out of Battlefield 6 for a card from 2017. These updates are strictly for security patches and making sure the card doesn't crash when you open a web browser. If a new game launches with a massive bug that only affects the RX 580, you're basically on your own. But we've finally hit a wall with this card. It's called mesh shading. Games like Alan Wake 2 and the new Borderlands 4 are built on a geometry pipeline that the RX 580 literally doesn't speak. It's like trying to play a Blu-ray on a VCR. And then there's the software block. Games like Indiana Jones look at your GPU, see no ray tracing hardware, and just shut the door in your face. No amount of fine wine or community drivers can fix the fact that the silicon is physically missing the tech that these modern engines require. Having said all that though, the RX 580 stayed a popular gaming card due to its massive stock of cheap hardware on the used market. I've purchased many of these over the years for around $50 to $60 US, a pretty insane value for what you get here. Is it still worth picking up for $50 to play the other 99% of games? Well, let's find out. For these benchmarks, I'll be using a modest Ryzen 5 5600 and DDR4 RAM. I understand that most GPU tests are usually done with the best hardware out there, but frankly, someone buying a $50 graphics card isn't going to be buying a $500 CPU. So I wanted to do these tests to give you actual real-world results that you can expect, not some Goldilocks situation with CPU-bound games. Before we even look at the charts, let's get the reality check out of the way. This is a $50 graphics card in 2026, and it straight up could not run the following games: Spider-Man 2, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Final Fantasy XVI, Doom: The Dark Ages, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, and Monster Hunter Wilds. They either crashed on startup or locked me out with hardware warnings. If you want to play those games specifically, you'll need to go buy a modern graphics card or maybe try cloud gaming. But for everything else, let's look at the benchmarks. If you are just building a rig for esports, this right here is why the 580 still sells every single day. Fortnite on medium settings, we're clearing a 101 FPS average with 1% lows at 80. You can comfortably play this on a high refresh rate monitor without any major issues. It's the perfect drop-in card if you're just trying to get a budget PC running to grind the Battle Pass, or to play similar shooters like Valorant and Counter-Strike 2. Now here is where the aging Polaris architecture really starts to choke. Expedition 33 on low native resolution sits at a pretty low 30 FPS average with brutal drops to 23. Even if we turn on FSR performance to try and bail it out, we only claw our way up to 38 FPS. The card simply lacks the modern hardware features to process this engine effectively, making it a kind of a difficult experience. But if it was between this or not playing it at all, I think I could push through and deal with it. Sony's PC ports are usually pretty solid, and Ragnarok is no exception here. On low settings, the RX 580 pushes a 61 FPS average, with 1% lows right behind it at a rock solid 55. It feels consistent from start to finish. It doesn't look like you're playing on a PS5, but the combat is fluid enough that you won't miss a parry because of hardware lag. Looking at the finals, another great shooter but with a ton of particle effects, we run it on low settings and get a 68 FPS average with 1% lows at 50. In a game where the environment is constantly exploding and reshaping, the 580 handles the destruction chaos decently. However, those dips down to 50 can be annoying during a sweaty firefight. Red Dead 2 is a perfect example of why you can't just look at average frame rates and call it a day. On medium settings, the 580 actually pushes a really impressive 80 FPS average, but look at those 1% lows violently dropping down to 28. You'll be riding your horse through the open world, the averages will look great, and then suddenly the card stalls out to load in new assets and you get a jarring stutter. It's fine for the most part, but a random dip in frames can be a little distracting. Older, highly optimized engines still do run great on this architecture. Hitman on medium gets an 87 FPS average and 62 on the lows. The frame delivery is consistent, keeping the gameplay smooth without needing to lean on any upscaling technology. That is a pretty big win for this $50 GPU. Space Marine 2 is incredibly heavy, and the 580 just gets absolutely crushed here. On low settings at native resolution, we are sitting at an unplayable 32 FPS average with 1% lows dragging at 25. Every time a massive Tyranid swarm renders in, the game basically turns into a slideshow. Now if we flip on FSR performance mode, we can drag that average up to 47 FPS, with the lows sitting around 34. It's technically playable if you have no other choice, but the visual hit is rough and the frame pacing is pretty bad and hurts the combat. Racing games usually scale pretty well, and F1 2024 is a perfect example of that. On high settings, we pull a 72 average and 60 on the lows. Absolutely no upscaling is required here, which means you get a crystal clear image while maintaining a perfectly playable and smooth frame rate on the track. Cyberpunk 2077 is a massive open world heavyweight, and the 580 struggles to keep up. On low settings, it averages 56 FPS with 44 on the 1% lows. It's so close to hitting that 60 FPS barrier, but falls short just a bit. So expect a distinctly last-gen console experience fighting you the whole time, although I do still think it's close enough that it's still a pretty good experience. The new extraction shooter on the block runs pretty well, all things considered. We have to drop arc raiders to low settings and use static lighting to get an 84 FPS average, and the 1% lows stay at 70. For a competitive game where visibility and smooth movement keep you alive, I would say that is totally playable. You won't be distracted by frame drops when you're getting pushed by another squad. Sony's Horizon Remastered averages 56 FPS on low settings, but the 1% lows take a harder hit down to 37. When you are fighting multiple large machines and particle effects start filling your screen, the stutter can become a real issue. You can finish the game on this hardware, but it might require a little patience, or you might have to go back and play the non-remastered version. This is where having that massive 8GB of VRAM actually saves this card from the scrap heap. On medium settings with textures cranked to high, we sit at 48 FPS because the engine eats up that memory buffer. But if we flip FSR to performance, we hit a very comfortable 65 average with 47 on the 1% lows. The textures still look pretty decent, and the game is perfectly playable from start to finish thanks to upscaling. Now Stellar Blade on low settings, native resolution, runs at 66 average, but the 1% lows dip to 42 during heavy combat. You will definitely feel the frame time spikes when the action gets really chaotic and you're trying to hit tight parry windows. It won't outright ruin the run, but it's a slightly compromised experience. But this game came out less than a year ago. The fact that it runs this well without any upscaling is an amazing sign from the dev team. Stalker 2 is heavy. Very, very heavy. So you are forced to turn on FSR performance right out of the gate just to hit a 65 FPS average. The 1% lows stay at 52, which makes the game mechanically survivable. Usually FSR at this resolution looks pretty blurry, but I was surprised by how good this looks, and it runs well enough that you can actually play without throwing your mouse at the wall. Just goes to show that you can't write off any game just because it seems unplayable at first. I wanted to end these benchmarks on the game Peak. It runs at an 80 FPS average with 58 on the 1% lows. I'm including this because it's the perfect example of a friend slop game. Whether it's this, Lethal Company, Repo, or whatever the flavor of the month is, you don't need to only play AAA blockbusters to get value out of your PC. The RX 580 will run these types of games and thousands of other fun multiplayer games 100% perfectly. And if that's literally all you and your Discord group play, then you will have no issues with this GPU. So where does that leave us? In 2026, the RX 580 8GB is officially the old guard. It's a card that has survived 2 crypto booms, a global pandemic, and now a DRAM shortage that's making even old DDR4 look like a luxury. Is it a good buy for $50 or $60? If you are on an Omega level low budget and $60 is the hard ceiling of your existence, then yes. For less than the price of a single AAA game, you're getting a card that can still pull 100 FPS in most titles and can actually limp its way through modern benchmarks, sometimes with FSR enabled. But here is my actual recommendation. If you can scrape together just $60 more, your life changes. On the used market right now, $120 gets you an RX 6600. That card is a totally different story. It gives you access to FSR4 AI upscaling. It actually has the mesh shaders required to run games like Alan Wake 2 and Borderlands 4 properly. And it does all of that while pulling half the power, meaning your electricity cost will also go down. So while it is technically double the cost of the RX 580, I feel like you are getting more than double the value. So for most people, I believe it's time to turn the RX 580 from PC gaming royalty to the PC gaming reserves. It's the card you buy when your main rig dies, or when you're building a first PC for a kid who only cares about Fortnite and Roblox. It is a spectacular piece of gaming history, and for only $50, it's really the best card you can buy at that price. But if you are looking to play modern AAA games on release, it's time to move on. Thanks to all the channel members for supporting the channel. If this deep dive helped you make a decision, hit the subscribe button. We're closing in on 100,000 subscriber goal, and every one of you counts. If you want to learn more about other budget graphics cards, click one of the videos that are on screen now. My name's Jason. Thanks for watching.